Daggers are often thought of as one of the weaker weapon classes in Dark Souls. But I thought it'd be interesting to put this hypothesis to the test. So I routed an entire all bosses speedrun utilizing this weapon type to see just how good or bad they really are. Daggers are not the first choice when it comes to speedrunning Dark Souls because of a variety of reasons. They have a fast moveset, but the damage leaves a lot to be desired compared to the more commonly used weapons. However, with the proper route, you might be surprised how fast we can clear the game with them. Going forward, I want to make this format into a series of weapon class speedruns. We've already done an all bosses speedrun using a bow, and this run will follow the same principles. And in order to fairly compare the runs and see which weapon classes are the fastest, this run will be segmented and follow the same general rule set, which is 1. No glitches. These runs are intended to be a weapon showcase, so we're going to limit ourselves to the sole speedrunning glitchless rule set for Dark Souls 1. This rule set does allow for some skips and exploits, so you can alternatively think of it as a no major glitches category. 2. Use the weapon. The majority of the damage being dealt throughout the run needs to be using the weapon in question, especially on bosses. I'm going to be using damage from other sources here and there to speed things up and execute certain strats. But the spirit of the run as a showcase of the weapon in question needs to be upheld. And 3. Kill all bosses. There are 26 bosses in total, and we're gonna take out every single one of them. I also didn't want to use any magic buffs in this run, such as Crystal Magic Weapon or Sunlight Blade, although theoretically they would work well with the dagger moveset. To me, this would just be kind of a different build altogether, but it's certainly valid if you want to do this yourself. That being said, we will still be using other buffs such as the Gold Pine Resin. Now, with all that out of the way, let's get into the actual run itself. As always, we start off in character creation, and for this run, since we want to fight all the bosses with daggers, we have two options for starting classes: Thief or Sorcerer. I have decided for this run that we're going to start as Thief for a few reasons. First of all, I think the bandit knife is maybe the best weapon for this run overall, and since we get a free master key as Thief, the extra firebombs are nice to take as a gift, as we can use them for a few time-saving strats throughout the run. Also, since I didn't want to use any sorcery-related weapon buffs for this run, only Gold Pine Resin, the Sorcerer class was just not very appealing compared to Thief. Even though we started with black firebombs, we want to primarily use the dagger to fight the bosses, so we won't be throwing any at Asylum Demon on first encounter, despite it being technically faster. Instead, we'll just run through and pick up our shield and knife, then continue and free Oscar for our flask, and then head upstairs to start the first boss fight. Unfortunately, getting the double hit plunge on Asylum Demon with the bandit knife is either impossible or extremely precise, so I just get a regular single hit on the boss. I have heard of people getting the double hit using this weapon, but I've never actually gotten it myself, so let me know if anyone else out there has managed this feat. Otherwise, Asylum Demon is pretty easy as usual. You just get on his butt and attack. The bleed does a lot of the work for us, as these Asylum Demon type bosses are very susceptible to it. This is also one of the few bosses I like to actually use the two-handed moveset for the bandit knife on. In my experience, the one-handed moveset is actually faster DPS for the bandit knife because of the lower stamina consumption, but for some bosses, the two-handed moveset feels a little more comfortable for me. Now that we're free from the asylum, we can head into the rest of the game, and if you saw my previous bow speedrun route, this beginning will look a bit different. Since we don't need to pick up the composite bow from New Londo, we are going to save that area for later and immediately enter Undead Burg. For all bosses routes, it's typically a little faster to go through Undead Burg to reach Undead Parish, rather than Valley of Drakes or New Londo, and that is mostly because of Tourist Demon. You might be surprised how quickly you can get to Parish through Burg, and having to come back for Tourist Demon later adds a big chunk of time no matter how you end up routing things. The one advantage of going to New Londo early for this run would be getting the very large ember earlier on, so we could go from plus 10 to plus 15 slightly earlier. Using a normal upgrade path weapon, especially one that relies so heavily on being fully upgraded, really diminishes the advantage of skipping early New Londo because of the very large ember. But with the rough timings I made, comparing the options, it seemed like this was still the fastest option available. In Burg, we don't need anything from the merchant, so we'll actually just run right past and pick up the gold pine resins. Then quit out next to the Black Knight to de-aggro any enemies on our tail. 3 riposts and a black firebomb is enough to take them out for our first Titanite chunk. This is a good example of how we'll be using black firebombs throughout the run, not as a primary damage source, but just as a way to speed up a few things. We'll take out this lizard here for the lucky double chunk drop, and I'll make sure to place notes on the screen where you can get other chunks to make up for these if you get unlucky. And then we'll get Taurus Demon to fall off the bridge, not only because it's faster, but it will also save us some gold pine resin for later. For Hellkite, since we ran past the merchant and don't have a bow to shoot him down for safety, we'll just YOLO and hope he doesn't scorch us as we pick up this soul item to pop as we wait for the gate to open. We want to take out this Black Knight on top of the tower here as well for another Titanite chunk. This guy is a little tankier, so it's going to require 2 firebombs along with 3 riposts to take him out. And from here, we're just booking it to Andre the Blacksmith. So not only did those Black Knights we killed give us some Titanite chunks, they also gave us some extra souls, which means we have just enough to buy 9 Titanite shards and upgrade our bandit knife to plus 5. Right now, our gold pine resins are going to be doing the majority of the damage rather than the upgrade to plus 5. But doing this now just saves us from having to walk downstairs again later. Next, there's an item that is crucial for this run in order to actually have reasonable damage, and it's called Red Tearstone Ring. If you're not aware of its effects, the Red Tearstone Ring is going to effectively double our damage output whenever we get below 20% HP. So many of the boss fights will be done while being only 1 hit away from death. Going into Dark Route like this is a bit out of the way, but it's absolutely worth it for the extra damage the ring will provide us. On the way, we also get 2 additional Titanite chunks as a lucky lizard drop, and then drop down for the longbow pickup. Then we can drop down some more to grab the Grasscrest shield, as its stamina regen properties will be very helpful throughout the run. Then we'll call up the elevator leading to Valley of the Drakes and quit out to teleport it to the top. And then we'll use this opportunity to drop some extra gear we don't need that's clogging up our inventory. This path we're taking is actually an argument for going through early New Londo, so we can grab the Red Tearstone Ring on the way to Undead Parish after draining the water. But with the timings I made, it was still definitely faster to go through Burg and then grab the ring like this. This is also a very similar early game routing to an old All Bosses route for Prepare to Die edition called Maildrinker, so it was comfortable territory for me. After avoiding the drakes, climbing the ladder, and picking up the ring, we can just dark sign back to Undead Parish, as we're only holding on to a few souls and we'd like to save our homeward bones if possible. We're ready to ring our first Bell of Awakening in order to gain access to Sin's Fortress, and Gargoyles is first up. As you can see, we are two-handing our Grasscrest shield here because we don't actually have the stats to one-hand it. The two-handed shield running attack animation will also help us knock an enemy out of the way in a very dangerous room ahead. We're not going to bother setting up our health for red Tearstone Ring for this fight, as the gold pine resin buff that we'll be applying to our weapon is going to be doing the vast majority of damage to the boss, and the ring actually doesn't buff the damage being dealt by the resin. Nevertheless, this is still a dangerous run up to the boss, so two-handing our shield is helpful, and here you can see the running attack to knock this guy out of our way. Coming up is one of the few times I will actually be dealing damage to a boss using a firebomb, because there's this really awesome tail cut strat you can do on the first gargoyle that gives us a free opening for massive damage like so. The tail cut not only staggers the boss, but sends him forward and causes him to turn around so we can just wail away freely with our resin buff dagger. Then the second gargoyle goes down for a quick boss fight overall. Now is a good time to just reiterate, this isn't a dagger only challenge run. It's a speedrun that primarily uses a dagger to kill all the bosses. I personally don't like restricting myself so much for these runs to not allow myself to deal damage with anything other than the weapon in question. As long as we stay committed to the spirit of the run, I think it's okay. If you want to do the run yourself, I absolutely encourage doing it however you want, and if that is a more strict approach, then that's fantastic. The fight itself doesn't change much anyways, it's just a bit slower on average. After ringing the first bell, we can then drop down to Oswald to buy 5 homeward bones in order to keep our souls throughout the run and warp out. We're still in the early phases of the run, where our goal is to ring the 2 Bells of Awakening to access Anor Londo, eventually gaining the Lord Vessel so we can warp around the map for more efficient traversal. So we're on our way to take the elevator from the Bell Church back down to Firelink. However, we really want to get our bandit knife up to +10 before we fight some of the harder bosses in the run, so instead of going straight to Blighttown where the second bell is located, we're instead going to head towards the depths to pick up the large ember and take out the bosses nearby on the way. Since lower Undead Burg and the Capra Demon fight is a little treacherous this early in the run, we'll go ahead and kick off Lautrec and quit out for his ring to improve our health and endurance. Then we'll rest at Firelink so we warp back here when we're finished to continue our goal of ringing the bells, and this is a good time to go ahead and get some levels. We put 1 into strength so we can use our grass crest shield properly, and then dump the rest into dexterity for more damage from our bandit knife. We could alternatively do Blighttown before going to the depths. However, we want the gold pine resin that Domal the merchant sells, and if we ring the second bell, he will move from the depths to a location under the aqueduct, which is slightly more out of the way, so it's faster to do this first because of less ground to cover. It also would be faster to just get Lautrec's ring later on the way to Blighttown, but it's a small time loss for a massive increase in safety. Entering Undead Burg again, we'll immediately jump down using the lower Burg skip here and then buff our bandit knife with some resin for the Capra fight. All of our combined gear with the damage output from the resin makes this fight not as bad as you might think this early on in the run, as we can one-shot the dogs and then Capra is not too difficult on his own. Once we deal the final blow, we'll do a quit out as he dies because there are a bunch of enemies chasing us at the fog wall we'd prefer not to deal with. Now it's time for the depths, where we want to acquire a couple of things while also setting our health for the red Tearstone Ring buff, because the next boss, Gaping Dragon, is a lot tankier than anything we faced thus far. Unfortunately, the fastest methods to set up your HP in this segment aren't always consistent, so we kind of have to play it by ear. I don't take any damage from the enemies in this run while acquiring the large ember, so I'm going to use the most consistent but also slowest setup. Intentionally getting grabbed by this slime that drops from the ceiling that does several ticks of damage, but quitting out just before it deals a lethal amount. It's a solid backup whenever the other enemies don't cooperate with you on the way to the boss. But before we head into Gaping Dragon's arena, we're going to stop by Damal to pick up the gold pine resin he sells as mentioned before. Reaching the Gaping Fog Wall, we'll go ahead and apply our resin buff and then enter the fight. Here we're crossing our fingers and hoping he does his slam attack, exposing his floppy head for a good outburst of damage thanks to RTSR. He usually does this attack, but not always, and the fight is usually a lot slower and more dangerous when he doesn't. Running back towards the entrance, we get another opportunity to attack his face after he stops charging, and by this point we've done quite a bit of damage to his health bar. Perfect RNG would be that he does another slam attack right away, but he doesn't give it to me on this run, so we have to deal with just finding some additional openings to finish him off while trying to avoid getting picked off by the channeler from above. Once he's taken care of, we can bone back to Firelink. Spawning back in at Firelink, this is the best time to go ahead and dump our souls into dexterity to maximize the damage from our knife, as the souls we get from the next boss will instead go towards purchasing items and upgrading our gear, so we might as well get all the damage we can for now. And that next boss is Quelaag. Finally, the boss guarding the second Bell of Awakening, which means it's time for Blighttown. Quelaag is similar to Gaping in that she is a fairly tanky boss for this early in the run, so we're going to want to use the red Tearstone Ring here as well. In fact, we'll be using RTSR for nearly every boss for the rest of the run as we try to make sure our bandit knife's damage output continues to scale relative to the boss's health bars. The fight with Quelaag has an extra wrinkle, however, in that the swamp before her arena will poison us and make the slightly drawn out fight very dangerous as the poison continues to tick our health down while we're already under 20% HP for RTSR. Because of this, I'm going to perform a special Blighttown drop here to land right next to this blow dart sniper and firebomb him for the moss that he drops. We can use this to cure our poison status once our HP gets low enough for RTSR to be active. We'll drop from the wheel for some damage and then pick up this large shard that we'll use to get our knife to +6 soon, and then roll through the swamp, avoiding enemies on our way to Quelaag's domain. At this point, I can tell that my HP is a little too high, so the poison tick won't get us below the 20% threshold before we reach the fog wall. So I'm going to do a trick to lower our HP using the slopes on the side of this tunnel. If you run up against a slope like this while going downhill, the game essentially thinks you're falling and will deliver a chunk of damage depending on how long you run up against the slope. Reaching the fog wall, I'll buff my knife with resin and then cure the poison as it puts me just below the HP threshold and then enter the fight. As I said before, Quelaag has a lot of HP for an early game boss, so this is going to take a lot of hits even with RTSR and resin. Luckily, she has several combos that leave her open to long strings of attacks if you know where and how to position yourself. The only attack that you really have to stop your DPS for is her AoE explosion, which is easy to notice if you see the human on top start to lay down. In that scenario, we can just outrun it and then get back in to continue chunking her health, and eventually she goes down. In a good fight, you should have plenty of time to finish her off before your resin even wears off. With the Spider Lady dispatched, we're free to ring the second Bell of Awakening and leave. Unfortunately, since we don't have the Lord Vessel, we won't be resting at the Daughter of Chaos bonfire to warp back here later, since in order for it to be active, we actually have to rest at it, and then we'd have to climb out of Blighttown, which is much slower than just coming back here later. With the bells rung, we can now head back to Undead Parish to then enter Sin's Fortress on our way to the current objective, Anor Londo. We want to get the Lord Vessel from Guinevere, not just because it's necessary for game progression, but also the sooner we have it, the sooner we unlock more efficient traversal by warping between bonfires. We'll pop Quelaag's soul on the elevator as we ride divide it up since there's some shopping we want to do with the Crestfallen Merchant in Sin's Fortress soon. But before that, we'll make a pit stop at Andre to drop off the large ember we picked up and ascend our knife to +6, as well as purchasing a weaponsmith box so we can finish the upgrade to +10 ourselves later on. Going through Sins itself is fairly straightforward if you're familiar with the pendulum cycles, but we also want to make sure we pick up the large shards in this chest on the way. We also made sure to equip our starting armor here for the red Tearstone Ring setup we're going to perform after quitting out to skip this boulder that's on its way down. 2 arrows from this trap is enough to put us under the 20% threshold. There's also a strat where you could backstep through the boulder for the RTSR setup, but I actually think the arrow trap setup is roughly the same speed, and sometimes the boulder does an extra tick of damage which will just kill you. Reaching the top of Sins, we're going to go pick up this large soul item as well as this final set of large shards, both laying on the ground, then jump the gap to do some shopping with the merchant here. We're gonna buy 4 additional large Titanite shards, some green blossoms, and then dump the rest of our souls into black fire bombs. And then continue our way back towards Iron Golem. If you really wanted, you could take the bonfire nearby to upgrade your knife to +10 now for an easier golem fight, but it's not necessary and definitely slower, especially since we're not going to be dealing his entire health bar worth of damage, just enough to stagger him and knock him off the arena. After dealing 400 damage below his knees, Golem will stagger, and then another 200 damage will make him fall backwards. If he's positioned properly when you make him fall, he'll instead just fall off the arena, instantly killing him. This means we only need to deal 600 damage overall to finish the fight, so a +6 knife with RTSR and resin is plenty of damage for us. There's a few different ways this fight can go depending on what he does at the start, but it's fairly consistent either way. The best RNG you can get is where he will stop with his right leg, and you can almost instantly stagger him. This fight, we got the grab, so it wasn't perfect, but still plenty fast enough for us to take him out in no time at all. We've made it to Anor Londo, where we can defeat Ornstein and Smo and acquire the Lord Vessel. But while we're on our way, we need to make a stop to rest at the Anor Londo bonfire so that we have it as a warpable option later on. There are ways we could skip having to rest here to get the bonfire for free later on, but with the routing that we have planned out, it's best for us to just acquire it now. We won't spend our souls and upgrade just yet, as we have another bonfire to acquire, and we're going to get more souls now anyways as we pop Golem Soul on the elevator here before jumping off and doing some parkour on our way to Rafters. Although it may seem intimidating, as long as we get off this first ladder without being bombarded by knives, the Rafters section is pretty chill. We just need to make sure this guy by the chandelier doesn't mess with us, and then we're home free, as this skip called Namu Rafters will get us out of here a little sooner than normal. We have to turn the rotating staircase to access the second part of Anor Londo, but before continuing, we'll rotate it down an additional time so we can also rest at the Darkmoon Tomb bonfire in order to unlock it as a warp point for later on. And now is the perfect time for us to upgrade our knife to +10, and then level up our dex to 40, with the leftover souls going into endurance. We'll continue our way to ONS by going back up the rotating staircase and calling it back up to the top. We'll also do another trick here to avoid having to turn the elevator again later on. This elevator is unusual compared to others in this game, in that if you quit out before it has fully finished moving to its final resting spot, it will not update its position upon reload. So we can walk off the elevator slightly before it finishes and then confirm a quit out as soon as we do. And if done correctly, when we come back later on to fight Gwyndolin, we won't have to turn the elevator to send it back down again on our way towards the painting. From here, the rest of Anor Londo is straightforward, as we attempt to make it past the Batwing demons and Silver Knight archers to enter the interior section where Ornstein and Smo reside. We'll use this Silver Knight and some fall damage to set up our HP for Red Tearstone Ring in preparation for our encounter with ONS. Although we're using a dagger, the overall strategy for this fight remains the same. We want to take out Ornstein first because he's easier to isolate in phase 1, and then Super Smo in phase 2 is much easier to manipulate than Super Ornstein. What really makes this fight tough compared to most ONS encounters is that the bandit knife won't be able to stagger either of them, which is normally a powerful method to control the chaos of the first phase. Luckily, they both bleed, so the damage isn't too bad. We do have one gold pine resin remaining for this fight, but we want to save it for another boss later on, and they're resistant to lightning anyway, so it wouldn't be extremely helpful. One of the biggest reasons to fight Super Smo instead of Super Ornstein is that you cannot stagger Super Ornstein, but with this weapon, that advantage is no longer a concern. However, I think because of how much easier it is to manipulate Super Smo, it's still worth doing the fight this way. All that being said, this is one of the scarier fights in the run, and feel free to take the nearby bonfire, otherwise you're going to have a bad time running all the way back from Darkmoon Tomb if you die. Once they're down, we can pop this large soul on the elevator and then finally acquire the Lord Vessel from Guinevere, which of course will just shoot her, not only because it drops faster than compared to talking to her, but also we want it to be Dark Anor Londo anyway so we can access Gwyndolin later on. From here, we'll warp to Undead Parish, although we're only coming here to rest at the bonfire, so we warp back here when we're done with our actual upcoming segment in the return to the asylum for Stray Demon. Now that we have the Lord Vessel, we want to finish upgrading our bandit knife to its maximum level of plus 15. In order to do that, we'll have to acquire a couple more Titanite chunks, the very large ember, and a Titanite slab. And of course, Stray Demon will drop a slab upon defeat. Taking the elevator up, we'll pop Smo's soul while we wait and then make our way to the crow's nest and pretend to be an egg. There's a convenient red Tearstone Ring setup we can do for Stray Demon here by dropping into the arena and quitting out. Then dropping in a second time to put us in perfect range. The quit out also gives you a pretty free opening as it seems to confuse his AI a bit at the start, so you can immediately get to swinging. This fight is similar to Asylum Demon in that for me, the two-handed moveset feels a bit more comfortable for landing attacks, as well as him being highly susceptible to bleed. After a few rounds of punishing the openings, he goes down pretty easily and drops us a Titanite slab for our troubles. And while we're here, we want to climb the ladder nearby to leave so we can pick up the Peculiar Doll in order to enter the painting for Priscilla later on, then warp back to Undead Parish. Continuing our current objective to max out our knife, we're gonna purchase the Crest of Artorias from Andre on our way to the hidden bonfire in Darkroot Garden. We're doing this because we want to get the very large ember in New Londo, but while we're there, we want to take out the boss in the area, Four Kings, as well, in order to avoid having to return to New Londo a second time. But in order to fight Four Kings, first we have to take out Sif, who will drop the Covenant of Artorias ring, otherwise we'll get taken by the Abyss. We also want to use this hidden bonfire ahead as our hub for the next portion of the run, so we're going to make sure we don't rest at any other bonfires for a while because we can't actually warp to this bonfire. This is because once we get our knife upgraded all the way, we then want to access the DLC, and this is the closest location for all the DLC access related portions of the game. The exception to this is the Pendant Golem in Duke's Archives, but we can simply warp to Anor Londo from here. You also may have noticed we haven't placed the Lord Vessel yet, so in order to access Duke's Archives, we'll place it with the other serpent, Kath, after defeating Four Kings, saving us the trouble of an additional warp that would be necessary throughout all of this if we place the Lord Vessel from Framp's Pit. Continuing our way to Sif, we have one of the more troublesome RTSR setups in the run as it relies on some enemy RNG from this knight in the forest. Of all the enemies in here though, this one seems to be the most consistent, and usually it's fine, but sometimes she does not cooperate. Luckily, in this run, she gave us a good attack, and using some fall damage on the way, we'll be able to easily get into RTSR range. We'll also do a trick here called Ruin Skip to quickly acquire the stone armor set from the chest here, which will be useful for a couple things throughout the run. The first of which is on Sif, as we have enough equip load to wear the gloves while maintaining fast roll, which will also give us enough poise to avoid being staggered by Sif's jumps. We also want the Hornet Ring for later on, so we'll pick that up, then trigger the fight. Sif is generally one of the more annoying bosses for speedruns, as he's pretty random with all the jumps that can disengage him from combat constantly. The one-handed moveset of the knife is not bad for hitting his skinny legs, but the range does cause us to miss sometimes. Overall, he's not too tanky for us at this point, and he does bleed, so the fight doesn't take too long, and we can bone out as soon as we land the final blow. Now we can warp back to Firelink, taking this opportunity as we rest to level up our endurance even further to make up for the loss of our Ring of Favor and Protection. We really want to use RTSR for the next boss fight, and since we need to have the Covenant of Artorias equipped in the Abyss, we must unfortunately sacrifice our FAP. Heading down the New Londo Ruins elevator, we'll make sure to pop Sif's soul during the downtime and then make our way across the wooden bridges, past the ghosts, and finally arriving at Ingward, who holds the key to the seal that we need to drain the water. We'll quit out here to remove the aggro from the mini ghosts following behind us, and with a combination of firebombs and arrows, we'll take out Ingward from a distance to have him toss us the key like he's the Kobe Bryant of Lordran straight into our inventory. From here, we can open the door to the seal and drain the water from New Londo, allowing us not only access to the boss, but also access to the remaining materials needed to upgrade our knife to plus 15. Because of this, we won't go straight to the boss, but instead drop down here and follow the path to this fog wall, and then up these stairs that will take us to the chest that contains the very large ember. Dropping down from here, if we land on this broken pillar, it will give us a perfect RTSR setup for the upcoming boss fight, and then, dodging this Dark Wraith, we can quit out here to shake his aggro and then perform one of my favorite kills, shooting this Dark Wraith with a bow to cause him to just run off to his death. The chest he was guarding contains a chunk, and then we only need one more for our knife upgrades. Luckily, there is a second chest with a chunk nearby that we can grab right before we head into the boss fight. And with that, we are ready to fully max out our weapon. Unfortunately, we'll have to settle with the plus 10 weapon for the Four Kings fight, but the damage is surprisingly decent with red Tearstone Ring and the last gold pine resin in our inventory that we saved just for this fight. When it comes to speedruns, Four Kings is always an important puzzle piece of any route, as you're trying to balance maximizing your damage as much as possible for this encounter with the amount of time it takes to actually obtain that damage. Whenever you deal the final blow to any of the kings that spawn, you can keep piling on overkill damage as their death animation plays out, which allows you to end the fight with less than 4 kings. Since each king spawns on a timer, the fewer you can manage to have spawn, the more time you will save in the fight. Using gold pine resin, we're actually going to be able to comfortably get 3 kings even with the bandit knife plus 10. We could maybe get 2 kings if we had a plus 15 knife, but the way we'd have to warp the route to get our weapon maxed out before this would probably end up losing more time than it would save by having 1 less king. You'll also see that I'm dropping items on the ground during the fight. This is a way for me to have some reference point in this pitch black arena so I can tell where the next king is going to spawn. Unfortunately, I still ended up getting a bit lost here and was nowhere near the 3rd king as it spawned, but they do close the distance to my character pretty quickly, so not a lot of time was lost. One of the best ways to efficiently DPS this boss is to learn how to strafe the king's attacks as much as possible, as you can basically avoid everything except for the horizontal swipes without having to roll at all. This allows you to preserve stamina for attacking instead of avoiding damage. Thanks to RTSR and the resin buff, we easily finish off the remaining bits of health on the overall health bar without having to touch the 4th king at all. And now that they're out of the way, we can talk to the Serpent Cath to warp us to Firelink Altar, where we can finally place the Lord Vessel and then warp back to Darkroot. Before we take out any more enemies, we are first going to rest and warp to Undead Parish so we can drop off the very large ember at Andre, ascend our bandit knife, and then max it out. Since we only have a handful of souls remaining, Dark Sign activation is a good way to preserve our homeward bone count. Now that we've achieved the sub-goal of maxing out our weapon, we can finish off our actual current objective, clearing out the remainder of Darkroot and gaining access to the Artorias of the Abyss DLC. Now is a good time to take out Moonlight Butterfly. This will actually be one of the few bosses that we don't bother setting up red Tearstone Ring for, as we'll be able to take out the boss fairly quickly without the buff anyways, and don't want to waste any time setting up our HP to activate it. Not to mention, one of Butterfly's attacks can be a little dangerous to consistently avoid, so I wouldn't recommend it either way. We'll wait a bit here for Butterfly's invulnerability frames to wear off, and when it becomes active, we're going to throw 2 black fire bombs, because if you deal a little bit of damage to the boss, it will actually land a good amount sooner than it normally would. But we don't want to just kill it with fire bombs, as this is a dagger speedrun after all, so we'll just wait it out and do the remaining damage with our knife once it lands, and do our best to avoid taking damage in the meantime. We don't have our FAP ring anymore, and we haven't leveled any vitality whatsoever, so we still have to be careful even when we're not using RTSR. Then we can Dark Sign back since we have no souls anyways, and the boss will still give us its souls as long as we time the warp correctly. Now that all the bosses in Darkroot are taken care of, we can finally begin the process of unlocking the DLC, and the first step is going to be defeating the Hydra in Darkroot Basin in order to free Dusk of Oolacile. The stone armor we picked up earlier is nice as a convenient way to set up RTSR on this long drop to the bridge, as the extra weight gives us just enough additional fall damage to put us under the threshold. After sliding down the ladder, we'll jump into the lake and avoid Hydra's projectiles while tossing a black firebomb as we wait for the first cycle of attacks from its head. A bandit knife jump attack does pretty good damage to him, and combined with a steady stream of black firebombs, we'll be able to kill the Hydra in just a few cycles without having to cut off every single head. After it goes down, we'll take the outer edge of the lake towards where the golden golem containing Dusk will spawn, quitting out and reloading to actually cause the quest line to progress. I was actually blown away that the plus 15 knife with RTSR was able to kill this enemy so quickly as we rescue Dusk from the golem. The damage is actually not that bad. After saying yes to Dusk, we'll bone back to the hidden bonfire and then warp to Anor Londo to not only finish unlocking the DLC, but also take out Seath the Scaleless. Coming up is easily one of the worst parts of this run, where we need to take out the crystal golem in Duke's archives that will drop the broken pendant that gives us access to the DLC. This enemy has a lot of defense, so it's going to take a lot of attacks from our knife to bring him down. Meanwhile, we're going to have a whole room full of channeler buffed crystal hollows breathing down our neck that will easily kill us in 1 or 2 hits, even at full HP. Maybe if we still had our Ring of Favor and Protection, combined with the full stone armor loadout, we could tank it, but since we're at base vitality, we have no shot. And there ain't no way that I'm going to kill every single crystal hollow in this room coming up during a speedrun because it's way too slow. So I decided to go with a very sketchy RTSR strat on the crystal golem, as we can take him down with 5 bandit knife swings while crossing our fingers and doing our best to get in and get out before all the crystal hollows can converge. Here is the RTSR setup I managed to get and the ensuing chaos of trying to take out the golem before panic rolling my way out of danger. As scary as that looked, it was honestly the safest strat I could figure out without sacrificing other stats just to level vitality or doing something slow like killing all the enemies in the room. Now that's taken care of, we can do the very classic Duke skip, utilizing the bow setup strat that I highly recommend learning if you haven't already. We can do a little more parkour with this ladder skip on the way to the crystal caves, making sure we put on our dust crown ring to help us control our HP for RTSR as we take fall damage from multiple different drops on our way through the cave towards the boss. We're gonna do this specific pathing here to try to get the clams to get stuck on each other and prevent them from joining us in the fight with Seath, which is honestly the most dangerous part of the entire boss fight, making sure they don't get in there with us. Once we enter the fight and shoot the crystal to remove Seath's invulnerability, he actually goes down pretty quickly since he kind of just sits there for the most part and really lets us show off the DPS of the knife when we don't have to do much dodging. Depending on the RNG, you can totally one-cycle him here, but in this run, we got unlucky and had to settle with a 2-cycle after dodging 1 attack. After he goes down, we'll warp back to Darkroot with the Homeward Bone, as we are now finally on our way to probably the most difficult part of the run, the Artorias of the Abyss DLC. At this point, we are pretty much full power with our plus 15 bandit knife, so our damage output is about as good as it's going to get. It's time to take on the tankiest and most dangerous bosses in the run. On the way to the first boss of the DLC, Sanctuary Guardian, we have an easy RTSR setup here where we can do the same drop that we did earlier on the way to Hydra, but with the Dust Crown Ring equipped. All we have to do after the drop is remove the ring and our HP is perfectly under the 20% threshold. Once we enter the lake, we can just follow the wall all the way to the end and enter the portal, then cross the fog wall for our fight with Sanctuary Guardian. This is one of my least favorite bosses to fight in speedruns because he's very RNG dependent. If he flies away a lot or shoots a bunch of lightning attacks at you at the beginning of the fight, you can lose a lot of time. However, for this run, I was surprised how easily he went down, and part of that is he's fairly susceptible to bleed. Not to mention, some of his openings give you very large windows to unleash several attacks where you can chuck him down quite a bit. He ends up going down pretty quick, but you can definitely have a lot of variance between the best and the worst fights in terms of speed with this guy. Coming up, we're going to make a quick stop at Elizabeth to purchase some more gold pine resin, a spell called Hidden Body, and a catalyst in order to cast it. This spell will allow us to get through some of the more dangerous areas coming up fast and consistently. I didn't mention it before, but we've already leveled our intelligence stat up to 14 in order to cast it, but we don't need a rest at a bonfire just yet, so we'll have to wait to attune it. Making our way through the Royal Wood, we are very quickly closing in on what I would consider to be maybe the worst boss in this entire run, Artorias. We'll take all the help we can get for this one and use a resin buff, even though it will only add a little bit of damage per swing. This guy has a pretty chunky health bar, but also a lot of resistances, just like the other bosses in the DLC. The big difference is that he does not really give you a lot of opportunities to get in more than 1 or 2 attacks at each opening, especially since we're using RTSR and have to play a little safe to make sure we don't get hit at all. Using a fast weapon like this, we do get more opportunities for safe punishes than we would with other weapons, but his resistances are so high that each attack doesn't really do much, so only being able to get a couple hits in here and there is pretty bad. Not to mention the poor range of the knife makes it even more difficult to actually land the punishes. And as you may have noticed, we can't even knock him out of his buff animation with the dagger attack, so we have to constantly retreat. All that being said, having RTSR and the bandit knife at plus 15 makes a huge difference here, as we're still doing pretty good damage per swing, all things considered. This was far from perfect RNG, but we finally managed to get him down and can breathe a sigh of relief as we move on to the second half of the DLC. We'll go ahead and rest at the township bonfire just after Artorias. This will be our hub for the rest of the DLC portion of the run. Now is a good time to attune Hidden Body, and we can dump our souls into Endurance. But before we continue into township itself, we're going to double back in the other direction to trigger Kalameet. Before we can engage the Black Dragon on the ground, we have to see him for long enough to where the NPC Goth will offer us his assistance in grounding the boss with his great bow. While we're on the way to do that, we can purchase a few things from Chester to set us up for the rest of the run. A few more blossoms, bones, and a talisman for the Crest Key Mimic is all we really need. A cast of Hidden Body will help us comfortably get past these dogs on the way. For triggering Kalameet in this way, all we have to do is drop down to this ledge where the crystal lizard is hanging out, then wait for him to pass and disappear behind the mountains in the distance. Once you see him go, you can safely warp back, as that's enough time to satisfy Goth. Now we'll get through Township itself. This place can be a little sketchy with the map design and enemy placements doing a lot of work to give us hell, but Hidden Body is an extremely powerful tool to get us through here, not only safely, but also quickly, as we don't have to do anything slow like baiting enemies out or killing any of them in order to get past. We can just run through for the most part. I recommend casting the spell about here, just before the first sorcerer. This narrow bridge is the first example of how good this spell can be, as we can just drop down and run past these enemies without them doing much of anything to us at all. I know some players like to use the Ring of Fog, and that item certainly has an effect on the enemies, but it's definitely not as powerful as the effect of Hidden Body. Making our way through this building to get the crest key from the upstairs mimic, we'll land on the balcony and quit out, because it makes this enemy basically incapable of attacking us while we throw the Lloyd's talisman at the mimic and pick up the crest key. No point in wasting time killing the enemy when a talisman gets us the item much faster. As we exit the room, we'll apply another cast of Hidden Body as we're approaching one of the worst enemy sections in the entire game, a place dubbed Hell Bridge by speedrunners. Crossing this section to the Chasm of the Abyss, we have two sorcerers and a whole gang of regular bloatheads waiting for us, but thanks to Hidden Body, we can easily run right past them, completely unscathed. We do have to watch out for the chain prisoner ahead, but he's not too hard to dodge on his own, and then we can quit out as we trigger this elevator to not only send it up immediately, but also despawn the enemy that would normally be waiting for us as it arrives. Making our way through Chasm of the Abyss is simple thanks to Hidden Body. We'll apply a cast here to give us safe passage from the sorcerer coming up on the left, and then ring swap the Crown of Dusk to have our HP, then jump from this ledge to give us a nice RTSR setup. Hidden Body runs out just as we get to the fog wall, so we can eat a blossom and then trigger the fight with Manus. This is my favorite boss in the whole game, so even though the fight will be long because of his large health bar and high resistances, I honestly don't mind too much. He's not nearly as annoying as Artorias because we get far more windows to punish, and they're also far longer, so we can actually get more than just one attack every time. Because of this, the fight actually ends up being shorter than the Artorias fight overall, even though Manus has almost twice as much HP. There are two common annoyances while fighting Manus in a speedrun, however, and those are the Wombo Combo melee attack as well as the Dark Rain attack. These aren't difficult attacks to dodge, however, they waste a lot of time, and they don't really give you much of an opportunity to get in a punish afterwards. Thankfully, he can only do the Dark Rain in his second phase, which comes online once he's down to roughly 60% HP. This particular fight, I didn't get too many of these bad RNG attacks, so it was a fairly decent fight. Now that he's taken care of, we can warp back to the township bonfire to finish off the last remaining boss of the DLC. Only Kalameet remains, but before we can fight him on the ground, we need to talk to Goff, so we'll head upstairs and unlock the door to his room and climb the ladder to speak with him. Making sure to say yes to his prompts, Goff will shoot down the dragon for us, and we can just warp back to the township bonfire again, as it's faster than trying to run out from here. We'll do the same strat as before, casting Hidden Body on the way through this canyon to protect us from the dogs. We'll equip the Dust Crown Ring on the fog wall to help us set up our TSR. Dropping down to here, then to the bottom is enough fall damage to put us in range after we remove the ring. This is another boss that I'm not too fond of, as he is also highly RNG dependent and also has some wonky hitboxes that can be annoying to avoid. He has some really bad time wasting attacks where we either have to completely retreat or chase him down across the arena to get back into combat with him. If we can get him to stay put and engage with us directly without flying off though, we can actually dish out some pretty decent damage in a short amount of time. Not to mention, he's also susceptible to bleed, which is something a lot of people don't seem to know. It takes several hits to get a proc, but we managed to get a couple in this fight. Overall, this wasn't the worst Kalameet fight, considering how many attacks it takes for us to bring him down. Interestingly, if you look at the length of all the fights for the DLC bosses, Manus, Artorias, and Kalameet were all roughly about 90-second fights in this run. Although I believe Artorias was still the longest by a short amount, which is crazy, considering how much more HP both Kalameet and Manus have. Finally, the last boss of the DLC has been defeated, and we can bone away back to the township bonfire. Now that the DLC is finished, it's time to clean up the rest of the game, and we'll start with Gwyndolin by warping to Darkmoon Tomb. This is one of the more impressive kills in the run, as we'll actually be able to one-cycle Gwyndolin with the damage we have from our bandit knife, which is something I was not expecting to be able to do. We just need to buff with resin and then set up our TSR, and conveniently, Gwyndolin's large magic missile puts us perfectly in range as long as we don't get unlucky with the attacks the boss does. Then we just need to wait for the arrow attack to make sure she doesn't teleport away too soon, and we can shred the entire HP bar for a clean one cycle. Now we can turn around and head towards the painting for Priscilla, carrying this RTSR setup from Gwyndolin with us. If you remember earlier on, we did a quit out on the spiral staircase elevator to warp it down to the bottom, so it's already here for us. We easily make our way past the painting guardians, as they're honestly not very good at their job, and enter the painted world map. This area can be a little dangerous to run through while in RTSR range, but thankfully, we have Hidden Body, which makes running through a breeze. We're going to do a skip here, which I know looks a little glitchy, but it's really just exploiting a bit of unfortunate geometry attached to the bridge. It's allowed in glitchless speedruns, so we're going to use it either way. Then coming up, I'm going to show off a brand new strat that was actually discovered while I was in the process of making this video, which makes the Priscilla fight 10 times better for this route. Normally, the bandit knife cannot knock this boss out of her invisible state, which makes the fight extremely dangerous. But recently, a glitch hunter and speedrunner called Androv T discovered that if you just aggro her from a particular spot, it will cancel the teleport and invisibility, so we can just easily chunk her down with the bandit knife. I cannot believe it took so long for this to be discovered. It's actually kind of amazing. And you don't want to see what I was doing for this fight with the bandit knife before that strat was found. It was awful. Coming out of the painting, we'll use a bone which takes us to the Anor Londo bonfire, and then we can warp to Firelink. We want to rest here to make it our current bonfire, and then use this time to level up our vitality to 16. Now we're on our way to the Catacombs and Tomb of the Giants to take on Pinwheel and Nito. We don't necessarily need 16 vit for this segment, it's mostly just going to be useful for some specific RTSR setups later in the run. Making our way through the graveyard and into the beginning of Catacombs, we'll pull the lever and quit out to not only skip the animation, but also remove the aggro of the skeletons behind us. We'll cast Hidden Body here as we exit the room to make the skeletons and bone wheels ahead a lot nicer to us. With Hidden Body active, we can also do this cool jump to the middle section of Catacombs and then put on our Dusk Ring to control our HP as we descend to the bottom. And again, thanks to Hidden Body, the bone wheels down here barely even notice us. Removing the Dusk Ring as we drop into Pinwheel's arena is enough to set up our HP for our TSR, and he goes down pretty quick. Sorry, Pinwheel. Now for one of my favorite running sections in the game as a speedrunner, the Tomb of the Giants. I always love doing the parkour in this area, especially because it looks so impressive in complete darkness. If you know where you're going and how to maneuver, this area is a breeze to run through, and it's so satisfying every time. This drop at the end is going to deal a big chunk of damage to us, but we're not going to heal as we'll just use this for an RTSR setup on the upcoming Nito fight. Yes, we are going to use RTSR for Nito, even though it's going to be sketchy. The fight is just so much slower without RTSR, it's absolutely worth it. Making our way past the Pinwheel room and to the fog wall, we're going to drop into the arena, and I honestly set up my HP a little poorly as I would prefer to have a little more than a sliver here so our stone armor can tank multiple skeleton hits. I can only tank one with this setup and immediately use up that free hit as I buffed a little late. But honestly, since the skeletons go down in a single attack and we have the Grass Crest shield to block with, this fight isn't as sketchy as I originally thought it would be. The fight goes quick as we deal tons of damage while avoiding attacks as we slice away. Whenever he starts doing explosions, we can just heal once and then block with our shield to put us back into RTSR range. The explosion even kills the skeletons that have already revived, so if anything, we'd prefer him to do this for additional safety. The bandit knife makes quick work of Nito here as he's already dead, and we can bone back to Firelink to take out the last few bosses remaining. It's now time to head back into Blighttown for our second run through the area. As I stated earlier in the run, we didn't have the Lord Vessel when we first rang the Bell of Awakening in Quelaag's domain, so resting at the Daughter of Chaos bonfire was out of the question. Resting there would add the bonfire to our list of warpable bonfires, which would have been convenient to have now, but it would also mean that we'd have to climb out of Blighttown, which is much slower than just running back there a second time. So we make our way down to the bottom of the swamp again, roll through while avoiding the enemies, and back through Quelaag's arena to drop down and enter the demon ruins to take on our next boss, Ceaseless Discharge. We'll rest at the bonfire nearby, so we warp back here once he's been defeated, and use this slope combined with a ring swap to put us in RTSR range. A lot of people might know about the intended cheese that you can do on Ceaseless to make him an easy fight, but that strat is actually pretty slow, so we're not going to bother with it. Our knife has a enough damage to take out the boss in only 2 cycles, which is going to be a lot faster than the cheese method. Shooting the boss with our bow to aggro him will apply a resin buff and then roll his opening attack, then attack him all the way down to half health. In this run, I got a little unlucky and Ceaseless decided to start moving around before doing his next attack, which lost a little bit of time, but not a ton. After he does the next attack, we roll it just like the first and finish off his remaining health bar, then we warp out. Now we're going to make our way to Demon Firesage, and we'll use a combination of the Dust Crown Ring and some fall damage drops on the way to set up our health for RTSR. Running past the enemies here is fairly easy, so we won't even bother using Hidden Bind. This fight is going to be similar to the other Asylum Demon copies in that he is very susceptible to bleed, so our knife is going to make good work on his health bar, and I'll also two-hand my weapon because I prefer this moveset on him. Unfortunately, he jumps back towards the fog wall, so we end up defeating the boss really far from the exit, but otherwise the fight wasn't too bad. We'll go ahead and heal up to full with the humanity so we can set up our health for the next boss, Centipede Demon. Using a fall damage drop here combined with the resistance from the armor we're wearing, we can set up our TSR with lava ticks as we move to the center of the arena to fight the boss. We don't want to fight him on the edges because it takes a lot longer for Centipede to make his way towards us from his starting position. We'll buff with resin at this spot to bait Centipede into doing one of his jumping attacks that, if we get underneath, will only do a small amount of chip damage to us. This puts us in a good position to fight him so he isn't too far into the lava, which would make things awkward for us. A couple cycles of attacks is enough to take him out as our resin, RTSR, and a couple bleed procs wipes out his HP bar to then drop us the orange charred ring that will allow us to run through the next section, Lost Izalith. Now is the part of the video where I mention how terrible this part of the game is. Thankfully, they have nerfed these dragon butt enemies a bit since the original patch of the game back in 2011, so their aggro range isn't as large, but it can still be a bit of a pain to run through unless you know what you're doing. So I recommend watching this specific pathing that I'm doing to get through quickly and safely if you're having trouble with the area. Coming up, we have the penultimate boss of the entire game, as well as maybe the most frustrating, Bed of Chaos. But if you're familiar with speedruns of this game, you might know that we have a strategy that will make things not only faster, but also a bit easier. For those not in the know, we're going to be executing a strat called Toki Bombs to essentially skip the first 2 phases. The slide on the way down to the boss is a good time to set up our gear for the rest of the run and equip our black fire bombs, which are necessary for the upcoming strat. I'll be running to a very particular set of tiles on the ground, which is just close enough to where the arms swinging overhead will miss, eat a green blossom, and then toss 2 well-placed black fire bombs to destroy the orbs on both sides, which will open up the center tunnel that we can just spam rolls through to reach the actual boss. Which, of course, we will take out with a single attack from our bandit knife. Only one more boss remains. Resting at the bonfire to warp will also level up our strength because we want a little extra damage for Gwyn. At this point, we're going to get more attack rating by leveling strength than we would for dex. After warping to Firelink, we'll enter Firelink Altar again, resting at the Lord Vessel to place all the Lord Souls and open up the Kiln of the First Flame for our approach to the final boss. We are, of course, going to be killing Gwyn using parries and ripostes, which is convenient because our bandit knife has a pretty good critical damage modifier, which also goes well with the Hornet Ring that we picked up next to Sif. The strength that we leveled up before is so we can kill Gwyn with one less parry and riposte, as we're just barely short of enough damage otherwise to do so while one-handing the knife, so the tiny boost to our damage ends up saving a bit of time. We're going to use this Black Knight in the kiln to set up our HP for RTSR, as he usually does this attack as long as you're sprinting into his aggro range. This is also why we leveled up 16 bit earlier in the run, because this HP setup puts us in RTSR range, but with a lot of extra HP left over, so if we have to block an attack from Gwyn, the chip damage from his fire attacks won't outright kill us through the shield. From here though, running through the kiln is a breeze, and reaching the fog wall for Gwyn, we're only a couple parries away from being finished. After the first riposte, we'll rotate to his backside to do a couple of swings from our knife for extra damage. In this run, I get a little unlucky and he goes for a grab, so I have to roll, but then I can block the fast attack he goes with next and parry the follow-up for the final riposte, and Gwyn goes down. And that is a Dark Souls all bosses speedrun using a dagger in 1 hour, 28 minutes, and 18 seconds. That's over 40 seconds faster than the bow speedrun, making this the fastest weapon class run I've done so far. But I imagine the dagger class being in the top spot won't last for too long, as there are definitely some more powerful options out there we'll eventually get around to. Our second weapon class speedrun is down, and the current leaderboard looks like this. If you want to weigh in on what class we should take on next, or see the runs early before I upload them to YouTube and other additional content, feel free to check out my Patreon, as I'm going to let my patrons vote on this. It's also just another way to support the channel so I can continue to make content like this. I'd also love to hear your thoughts in the comments about what we should do next. But that's going to be all for today's video. If you enjoyed what you saw, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, as we're almost at 10,000 subscribers. But until next time, thanks for watching.